For tonight's speaker, I am thrilled to introduce you to Leslie Adam. I was honored to meet Leslie, and I don't know if you remember this, when our daughters were in Girl Scouts together all those years ago. I think it was like 5th grade, and both of our daughters are in college now, and I just remember being so impressed with her at that time. But Leslie built her professional reputation as a leader who can deliver on the operational changes of achieving rapid growth in a people-centric businesses. And I'll let her share her full story and bio. She's committed to the conservation of green space and city life. Leslie chairs the board of the Friends of the Public Garden, advocating for the Boston Common, the Public Garden, and the Commonwealth Avenue Mall. She's a board member of the Beacon Hill Civic Association, was formerly president of the Beacon Hill Garden Club, and has served on the board of a number of local nonprofit organizations, including the Beacon Hill Nursery School and the Nicholas House Museum. Leslie has lived in Beacon Hill for over 20 years with her husband, 2 children, and rotating cast of French bulldogs. So without further ado, Leslie, thank you for coming.
Thank you all very much. I'm not quite as tall, so I will bring this back down. See if my fingerprint works. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're going to follow along. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for being here this evening, and I want to thank Cindy and Melanie for this very, very kind invitation. When I had the invitation first, I was all excited because I love the idea of the Beacon Hill Women's Forum. And so many times when I talk to people in the community or I'm talking to clients and I say, you know what, you've got to reach out to this organization. Because sometimes at different points in our lives we connect with community. It might be in the dog park, it might be through the nursery school. But I was meeting a lot of women that were coming to Boston and they'd left the suburbs and they really wanted to connect. And this has been the most amazing organization to help people do that, help women do that. So I think you've done an amazing job. I also want to shout out because Jen, unbelievable hard work and so impressive in your narrative, because I'm glad to hear that you're excited to get up every day, because sometimes I see you and I think, oh my God, where does she have that energy? It's impressive, so thank you. And for full transparency, I thought when I got the call that I was going to give you the neighborhood narrative about the Friends of the Public Garden. So I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm used to coming to the City Hall or to the State House and I talk about budgets. I had a really spectacular, wonderful fight in my experience about a thing called Winthrop Square. I had a really wonderful battle as well for a thing called Hempfest, or the Freedom Rally. For those of you who know me, I love a challenge, but this format of talking about myself is a little bit creepy. So bear with me. You have been a wonderful and welcoming and warm crowd, so thank you very much. What I have found is that in Beacon Hill, and through the various organizations that I've had the great honor of getting to know, I continue to be impressed with women in this community at every age. One of the first organizations that I started to become involved with was the Beacon Hill Garden Club. And that was a multi-generational group of women, and there were women there who had been real trailblazers here in Beacon Hill. Back when Beacon Hill was not particularly fashionable to be in, they used to tell us wonderful stories about digging and cleaning the tree pits and finding hypodermics and all sorts of interesting things. But they were also women that were incredibly warm and welcoming and willing to share all their personal stories. As I was finding different ways of stumbling with raising my own children, living in the city, and they were incredibly, incredibly kind. So anyway, thank you. I was thinking about what do I say to you, right? What do I say tonight? And it was a little uncomfortable, and then I was inspired last week. I attended an early morning breakfast with a young woman who's a new woman here in Beacon Hill. Her name is Lindsay Abbott, and she is the British Consul General's wife. And she's American, and she's a landscape architect by training. And she gave a really fascinating presentation on the morning that the Queen passed away. And she told a story about her career, following along with her husband, and the idea of her green spaces, about parks, and about how it gathered people. And then she also shared the very sweet story of her own gardens. And you know, at one point during her career, from DC to London to Islamabad, she had window boxes. And I thought, well, that's great. That's an inspiring Beacon Hill story. So I took some time and I started to think about my own experience. And so bear with me, because now I'm going to share a little bit of it. So thank you. Next slide. I was born here in Boston, Massachusetts, funny enough. I was born on April Fool's Day of 1964 at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And I was born in Roslindale. I was a terrible tomboy. That's much more me on top of the roof of the car than that one of me pushing the old mower. But my father's parents had emigrated to this country from Ireland. And so, you know, you think about the Boston story. One of our neighbors told a great story in her blog, The Woman's Survival Guide, that, you know, on St. Patrick's Day, all Bostonians are Irish. And I really am Irish. So, but we had an interesting Irish upbringing. So my grandparents had come from the north of Ireland, and my mother's family had come from the south. So there was a very interesting mix of Presbyterian Protestants and Roman Catholics. And only 4 people went to my parents' wedding. It's kind of interesting, yeah. But my father's parents really had an enormous imprint on me. They were both incredibly keen gardeners. My grandmother had an amazing, beautiful flower garden on the upside of the hill. She had roses, she had a little rock garden. And my grandfather was very quiet, no-nonsense, tall man. And he had his vegetable patch down at the bottom. And they had a very typical Boston story. My grandmother had come as a young woman at the age of 15 in service as a maid. And my grandfather ended up coming as a rivet boy, working in Charlestown in the shipyards as a bucket boy with hot rivets. Ended up starting his own painting and contracting company, which he grew to quite a large company, and educated his 2 younger brothers, one of whom became a professor and another who became a well-known writer and Presbyterian minister in the Midwest. But they were wonderful people who taught me a lot about family, duty, and hard work and integrity. And I think of them still every day. So, anyways, that was where it all began for me. My parents ended up, we could try the next slide, I'm not sure where we're going, but yeah, that's my mom. So that was my true north of my entire life, and she's still with me every day. She was from a big Roman Catholic family. She was the youngest girl of 6. She had 5 older brothers. Her older brothers were horrified that her parents allowed her to move to Boston as a single woman. And back in the day, it was kind of a big deal. She worked for State Street Bank. She had a wonderful career. But the moment that she was pregnant, her career ended. And so my father moved her to Roslindale as well, in the same community, not far from my grandparents. And we lived at the back gate of the Arnold Arboretum. And that was my first park, when I think about it. It's a whole series of parks that have become important in my life. We lived there in Roslindale. And then a sort of typical Boston story happened. My parents, as you can imagine, were kind of interesting, right? Protestant and Catholic. They were very different, but very interesting people, and a very dynamic household that was incredibly diverse. we're big fans of the public school, but as you know, Boston became a very different city with busing. And so I don't know if you've ever read it, but I highly recommend a wonderful book. It's called Common Ground. The Huntington Theater just recently put on a performance about it. And because I was a young kid, I don't think I really appreciated or understood all the things that were going on in my life. But we left Boston and we went to my mother's hometown of Manchester, New Hampshire. And I think I was the only child in Manchester, New Hampshire that used to spend their summers in the inner city of Boston. Every year I would come down. And so I got to know the Arboretum. I got to know Franklin Park because that was the closest park to my grandparents. I got to know an abandoned army camp at the backside of Cummins Highway in a neighborhood that at the time was a little interesting. But it was a really wonderful experience for a kid that was stuck in New Hampshire that felt like I didn't belong there. But anyways, that's my mom. And so before I get to this next slide, I went away to college and I applied to various schools, and we all know it's a stressful process. And I was in a situation, my parents were in the midst of a divorce, which was really difficult. And I got into Boston University and I was pretty excited. And then it became super clear that I was not going to be able to afford to go to Boston University. But I got an incredible opportunity to go to college in a small liberal arts college in upstate Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere. I think my mother cried the whole drive out there. But boy, I could not say no to that scholarship. So I went to a place called Juilliard College in upstate Pennsylvania. They had 100% placement for the previous 10 years in law school. And I couldn't beat that. And they had 98% placement in medical school. So it was a special place. I went, I made the most of it. I got involved in some really interesting parks and communities with the Amish community there, which was kind of interesting. And then the opportunity came home, I graduated, and I knew that I really needed to get back. One of the things I did while I was at college was I took the opportunity to go and spend a year in England, because Pennsylvania was feeling pretty small. And my year in England was really transformational. I lived in a place called Cheltenham, which is in the Cotswolds, if any of you have ever been there. And I just felt such a connection. I traveled around a lot. I spent a lot of time again in more green spaces and parks. And until I sort of started to think about this talk today, I hadn't realized the importance of all those spaces that I would go to for a moment of restoration and quiet and reprieve. And that's why they're important to us. I came home, I graduated, and I absolutely hightailed it right back to Boston. I got an amazing job with a law firm by the name of Sherwin Powers and Needham. So my first job was right here at 1 Beacon Street. It was a great job, and I thought I was going to stay for a year because I was going to go to law school. And I had the great benefit of being in this law firm, and I was put on a project representing Trinity Church against John Hancock. And it was fascinating. And boy, I'm going to tell you something, at the end of that year, I knew I probably did not want to practice law. I was struggling to figure out how I was going to pay for grad school. The firm had promoted me several times and given me some amazing opportunities, and I just was conflicted, so I stayed. And it was one of those places of working hard, connecting with people. There were a couple, again, incredibly strong women who turned out to be great mentors. I stayed with the firm for almost 10 years. I became their director of recruiting of young lawyers. It was the beginning, this is going to sound funny, of lawyers were allowed to advertise. Because back in the day, they could not. So it was the beginning of marketing. There was no such thing as 1-800-lawsuit, or you wouldn't see it. So, I mean, this firm couldn't have been any more conservative than you could possibly imagine. But they were wonderful. And what I realized later was as a young person, when you have opportunity and there are people to find that are mentors, use that and develop those relationships. They became lifelong relationships of mine. And looking back, I realized those were probably the best professional years of my life, but I just didn't know it at the time. An opportunity came up to go to London. I had met somebody, and I was madly in love with an Englishman, and he was going back at the beginning of what was the beginning of Cool Britannia. Labor was about to come into power. The gastro pub was taking hold, and he said, I want to go and do this thing in London, but I won't go unless you come with me, and we should get married. So I said yes, of course, right? I had just turned 30. All my college roommates were married, and I thought, yeah, I'm going. What the heck? I got no mortgage. I'm out of here. So I went to London, and it was the most amazing journey. I went to London, and again, I think of it, and it was about incredibly strong women and public spaces. I ended up finding a job through a video conference, and now this was a long time ago for all of you. We're all very used to Zoom. I heard about a job, and I ended up asking a favor from another firm to use their video conference because they were hail and door, and they were one of the only places in town that had video conferences. I went through an interview, and there were 3 men in what looked like a closet with curtains in London. And at the end of the interview, they offered me the job, but I had to arrive in a week. So I did it, and I moved, and my mother made all the difference. I got on that flight, and I landed. And I got on the red line 2 days later. It was like I was home in Boston. And I ended up sitting on the train, and British people don't speak on the tube, not like we do. They don't eat, they don't speak, it's all very appropriate. And I got on in Holland Park, and I got off at St. James Park. Again, my life was anchored by these wonderful, beautiful parks. And there was a man sitting across from me, and I thought, my God, I think that's the man that interviewed me. And he got off at St. James Park as well. And I got off, and I followed him, and he went into the same building, and it turned out to be the man who had offered me the job. But I loved London. London was transformational for me. London is like a very large Boston, and it is about beautiful, beautiful parks. I spent a tremendous amount of time in St. James Park every day when I would leave the office for a reprieve. And then I met a very special woman, this woman, and she was supposed to be my mother-in-law to be. Her name was Scylla Thompson, and she was a master gardener and famed in the Royal Hort Society. And she had an amazing home in West Sussex. And she was also the woman who helped me come to the conclusion that I should not marry her son, which was an even greater gift. She taught me so much about gardening, about life, about what was important. She was amazing, and convinced me to stay in London when I ended my engagement. She was incredibly generous of spirit and an incredible mentor. Right to our last time, we right until she died. My mother and I visited with her about 2 weeks before she passed away. But I learned so much from her. And then, we can look at the next slide. So I stuck it out, I stayed in London. Because you know what? I always say this to people, you never know, right? Just open that door, try something new. And I met my husband now. And we had some mutual wonderful friends, and I met Alistair, and it was incredible. And we met at another incredible great park. We were in Holland Park on a picnic, and that's when we met through some mutual friends. I then was recruited back by another law firm to Boston, and at the time, it was kind of the next step. And out of the blue, Alistair asked me if I would marry him. And so he was due to become a partner in his firm, in his banking firm. And I was kind of surprised, but I couldn't say no. So we came back to Boston, and we came to Beacon Hill. And that was a really transformational place. On my first anniversary, you'll see the next slide, Alistair gave me my first in the rotating pair of French Bulldogs. These are the original two, Sam and Moomin. We're now with Mr. Ed, who's number 4. And Alistair and I became captivated with the community that is Beacon Hill. We started to join various organizations. My husband's quite a rower. He got involved with the Union Boat Club. And we were both working. And Beacon Hill was just a great place. You walked out the door and this was all happening and people were welcoming. And he was really surprised, right? It was a city experience, but it really felt like a village to him. And so we stayed here, and the deal was we were going to stay for 2 years. And 18 months in, I said, what's the plan to go back? And he said, you must be out of your mind. I'm never leaving this place. I love it. So we stayed. And now we've been here almost 25 years. Next slide. We've raised our children here. And this community has continued to give to us our whole lives. There was, that one day, that one moment we did a drive out to the suburbs, and I thought, oh, this is so beautiful, and there's all those wonderful gardens and yards, but I just don't think I can do it. I just could not cut the cord. And at this point, I had met some incredible people and had the opportunity to give and volunteer. I probably need to learn to say, oh, thank you, I'm flattered, but no, I'm busy. But I can't tell you what it is to get involved. And I urge you all, find something that you love and get involved, because it really is a game changer. So anyways, my children have been super happy. They still love it here. Although there were those few years that they're friends in Wellesley with the basketball hoops, it was pretty sexy. But we got past that. We got past it. So next slide. And then when I was told about this talk, it was talking about all these different things that I would want to share. So one of the things I want to share about this is not only why I love this neighborhood, but it's the people and the places that gather. So, there's an amazing group of people through the Beacon Hill Garden Club that want to make this place attractive. So they clean the tree pits. They volunteer at the post office box. We clean Codman Island. Everybody likes to be involved, and that's what makes this place a special place, right? This can't happen without all of you and your love and commitment of a place like this. And I say to people sometimes when they say, oh, I really, I love Beacon Hill, I want to come to Beacon Hill. And I say, Beacon Hill is really special because people connect and get involved. So you be ready to just, you can't just come and go. Like you gotta roll up your sleeves and get in. So anyways, this is one of my special places. And then another slide. Next slide, I'm sorry. Who doesn't love the window boxes in this neighborhood, right? The tree pits are a challenge, and we do the best we can, but my first garden was a window box and a tree pit. And I just love the way you can walk through this community and be inspired and laugh and see all the different things. I don't know if you've ever seen the stormtroopers, up on Pinckney Street, but it's special, right? It's what makes us special. So, next slide. Again, special places and gardens and volunteering have always been super important to me. The Beacon Hill Garden Club was incredibly supportive of a garden, going back to the founding of our membership at the Old North Church. And it was a really spectacular garden that the garden club cared for decades. And a number of years ago, we all worked together for a new iteration of that garden, and we won a National Founders Fund Award through the Garden Clubs of America. And again, it was all through the volunteer work of people in this neighborhood. Next. And then the piece that I got from Cindy said, so talk about adversity. So, you know, I think we all have these challenges in our lives. And again, I had a tremendous challenge, and this community supported me yet again. I had finished working my career in professional services. I had been at the Boston Consulting Group, which was wonderful. Again, a whole series of experiences with professional services of renovations and lease negotiations, things that would come and serve me in my later year career. But I took some time to stop when my children were at an age where they really needed me. And then my mother was unwell. And then my mother died. And I was kind of catching my breath from a bit of a rebound. And I found out that I had breast cancer. And that was a heck of a challenge. But I love nothing more than a challenge. But I need a plan. You know, I'm just one of those ladies that, okay, this is not great, but I need a plan. And I'll tell you, this neighborhood solved all my problems again. I found out that they had found something, and I said I had 6 days of waiting. And of course, every one of my sort of friends and neighbors and, you know, assured me that it was all going to be fine, it wasn't going to be a big deal, and it was all those things a good friend would do. And people reached out. And then it was cancer, and it wasn't great. And I was sitting by the phone waiting for my own doctor to call me back, and I just hated that feeling. And I thought, well, wait a minute, you know, we live in the most amazing community there is, and I have a lot of friends, and I've been patient. I've waited 6 hours for that doctor to call me back, and now I'm really in my head, and that's not a good place to be by myself. So I started calling, and I called friends, and I called neighbors here in Beacon Hill. And by 4:30 that afternoon, I was at the Mass General, and I got to meet with an oncologist and a plastics breast reconstruction specialist. And it just felt amazing, and I can't tell you how grateful I was for all those people in this neighborhood that answered my call. We are fortunate that we sometimes probably take it for granted that this is our neighborhood hospital. But again, another specialty of our hospital, of our community. And again, it was a tough time, but it was really only through the help of women in this neighborhood and my friends and neighbors and people at the General that really got me through that time. So, yeah, that was my challenge. And then, next slide, then this came to me. As I was trying to figure out what to do next, I got a call, and I had been a non-voting board member of the Friends of the Public Garden, which was a group of people that inspired me. I would go to meetings, and they worked really hard, and this was a special place for me in my history of growing up in the city of Boston. And so I got a call, and they said, would you like to be a board member? Like only like a voting board member. I was really excited. I was pretty flattered. So I said yes. And then I got a call a week later, and they said, well, would you like to be the chair of the board? And it was exactly at the time that Winthrop Square was unfolding, which was a large development, as we all know, and it was going to break the shadow laws in the city of Boston. And again, I love a challenge. It got me out of my head. And I went to go meet with a number of people, and I couldn't say no. And I couldn't say no because what I'll tell you is the day that I got married, I would go to the swan boats every season with my mother and my grandmother. And the morning that I got married, my mother came in and she gave me a beautiful, beautiful handkerchief that was all embroidered with my new initial in blue, and it said A. So, and then she dug into her pocket and she pulled this out. And it was an absolutely gorgeous little antique handkerchief for the swan boats. To remind me that although I was marrying an Englishman, that I was always a Bostonian, and that this was our special place. And I thought, well, you know, I can't really say no to this new job. And so I said yes. Anyways, it was nonstop, intense. I spent a lot of time testifying at the State House and at City Hall and advocating against, you know, doing away with the shadow laws. They had been on the books for a long time, and there were people who really worked hard. Henry Lee and many, many neighbors well before us who made sure that they were trying to protect these parks. And it was soul crushing and sad. The city was pitting parks against parks. It was a bit of a have-not against haves. It was a feeling that it was the Common versus the Franklin Park. It was the two parks of my life pitted against each other, which felt really wrong in so many ways. And then it became really clear that the State House was going to approve the motion, and we were very lucky at the time. We had only two city councilors, Tito Jackson, who represented Franklin Park, which I thought was interesting, and city councilor at large, Michelle Wu, who supported maintaining the shadow laws. But it was clear they were going. And again, I like to analyze and look at the problem and see how do we come out of it. So we agreed that I would still go to the State House and I would testify against them, but that we were now spending almost $2 million a year at the time into the city parks of private money. And we had absolutely nothing more than a pinky shake. And from a business perspective, that made me crazy. And so I thought there was an opportunity. We could convince the city that we needed a formal agreement. Our spend was set to continue to grow, which it has grown. But it really felt good to have a framework of the fact that we were there by rights and what our role was. Because at that point, really, the city had all the cards on the table. The other thing that I didn't like with the arrangement, you know, you probably read it all in the paper, it was like $28 million. And I thought, $28 million? That could disappear in the blink of an eye, right? There's so much deferred maintenance in the Boston Common. And so we were able to negotiate at the last minute a fund of $5 million into a trust that throws off $200,000 a year for what I like to call low-hanging fruit. Work in the Boston Common the city doesn't want to do, nobody wants to do, but it really, really makes a difference. And so we've been able to continue to spend some of that money now, which I feel is, I was discouraged, but the MOU and that $5 million felt at least a little bit like a win. So, and through the Friends, we're now 52 years old. Next slide. And it's given me, again, something important to focus on and work with. So our founder, Henry Lee, who's on the right-hand side, who's one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. Best part of my job is I get to meet with him and have lunch every month. And he is a font of history about all of our parks and green spaces. Henry drove down a number of years ago. I was meeting with a woman who started the Central Park Conservancy, which is younger than we are. And she said, oh, I have a photo of Henry in an old beat-up VW with a bunch of folks from the Boston Parks Department, and they all drove down to help me set up the Central Park Conservancy. So anyway, Henry inspires me. The parks, especially during COVID, I don't know about for you, but it was a place of sustenance and reprieve to get outside. These parks are super special to me, but I hope to all of you. And they look the way they do because of so much hard work of people and the Friends, some of the people who are here. Bob Mulcahy, who's there in the wheelchair, who's our project manager, you may see from time to time in the park. I'm super sad to say that Bob is moving to California with his family, so we're looking for a new project manager. And our executive director, Liz Visa, who many of you may have met at things. But anyway, that is my love of this community. here we are. The next slide is, this was my highlight of achievement. There's nothing more fun than being in negotiating meetings with our former mayor. But it was really exciting to finally get a signed memorandum of understanding and agreement after all those years, after almost 48 years of hard work and investment of the Friends. So it felt really good. And our next, and that's it. I think that's it. We good? Good. But anyways, we're in a special place. And you're here. I feel like there's such a long history of Beacon Hill. We're all here for, sometimes a long time, sometimes for a brief period of time. But what makes it special really is all the people and the spaces here, and the willingness to sort of meet one another, roll your sleeves up and get involved and listen. And I continue to be impressed and amazed and sustained by the energy of all the people in this community, but most especially women. So I thank you very much for this evening.
Would you answer a few questions?
Sure.
If anyone has any questions for Leslie.
Yes.
I moved here 3 years ago, so we're just traveling from the suburbs. But, oh, okay. So, can you guys hear me? So, I was mesmerized by the parks, and every day I walk through, and I see people helping, whether it's in with the roses or whatever. And I'm just wondering, are there ways that we can get involved that would be helpful to your organization? It gives us joy and is helpful for you.
Yeah, no, there are ways. There are 2 volunteer organizations in the public garden. Well, no, I take that back. There's 3. So there's the Rose Brigade, and that has been headed up for over 35 years by a woman named China Altman, who's inspiring. She is quite a character. She's from the South, and she writes the most amazing emails if you're a volunteer. And so in the summer months, on Tuesdays, in the evening 5 to 7, in all the ornamental rose beds, they cut roses. You don't have to know anything about it. She'll train you up. Our season closes for the roses at the first frost, so that's sort of coming to an end. There's a border brigade as well, and those are people that work into the borders in that whole area, and there's a lovely group, many of the women from the Garden Club of the Back Bay who do that work. So that's a fun group, I'd say, get involved. And there's also a volunteer docent group at the Friends, and they give amazing tours. And if you haven't had a tour or read a little history of the parks, please, I urge you to do it. But yeah, they'll train, and again, you don't need to know anything about it, but they'll train you to be a docent.
Now, what does a membership do? I've been a member, but it would be helpful to understand where all those funds go and how that's.
Yeah, so as I said, at the time that I became the chair, we were almost exceeding $2 million of spend in the parks itself, all 3 parks. We now are exceeding $2.5 million of spend in the parks. We have had a very exciting couple of years. We're just about at the end of a capital campaign. The showpiece of the capital campaign is the restoration of the 2 child fountains and the Arlington Street entrance on either side of George Washington. Over in that area. We did a temporary piece of public art in the Boston Common. If you saw it, it was kind of fun. It was What Do We Have in Common? If you didn't see it, there's a wonderful film and feedback from all the young people who were the guides, and they shared their feedback and thoughts on that project. And then really a project that has been, again, another strong woman, a woman by the name of Margaret Picorni, who found the first letter that she wrote for the project of lighting the sculptures along the ComAv Mall. It's been over 30 years. And we finally got all the landmark approvals and the funding. And so if you haven't seen that, start to notice, I think we're down to the last 3 sculptures along ComAv Mall that we're trying to light. And I do think it's really transformed that area. Another thing I'll make a pitch for is the Beacon Hill Civic Association has a Charles Street organization, and from time to time we'll have a day where we're mulching or cleaning or planting on Charles Street, and all hands all happy hands are welcome on that one. Wear gloves, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on out there.
Don't pull the trash cans out.
Exactly.
So sorry, so it's also dominating, sorry.
No,
But that, so the funding for the memberships.
it funds all of that. Yep.
And then the big sculpture that's being done out towards,
Oh, the king. The king, yes. Liz had the opportunity to fly to Walla Walla, Washington a couple weeks ago to the Foundry where the King Memorial, it's called the Embrace, is being created. We have been advocating for a very long time, right at the beginning of the conversations about the king. Paul English is a man who's involved in tech, and he was a founder of Kayak. He was feeling discouraged about where our country was and was inspired by the writings and the speeches of Martin Luther King. And he thought that Boston needed something. And the Kings were here, they were educated here in Boston, and there's an amazing sculpture of Martin Luther King at Boston University, but it's really, it's some birds flying off. It's very lovely, but I think it wasn't what Paul had in mind. So Paul started with $1 million donation, the idea of this installation, and it's going to be transformational. We've continued to keep advocating. When we first met with them, they were all excited. They were going to build it, and they were going to give it to the city of Boston. And we didn't want to be, a killjoy, but we then at the meeting had to say to Paul and to Liz Walker and some other people, well, and who's going to care for it? And they were like, oh, the city. And then I said, oh, you know that they don't care for any of the sculpture in the parks, right? Because the Friends cares for the entire collection of all the sculptures in the city. So anyway, we ended up having some very constructive conversations about how much money they needed to raise to maintain that space. I think that's going to be transformational, that piece. That is a part of the Boston Common that's been challenging. I'm sure any of you who've been in the park know that the park is a microcosm of all of the things that our city struggles with, good and bad. And we deal with homelessness and drug use and violence, and we always say that all people are welcome, but not all behaviors. And so it's been a challenging couple years, but I'm really excited because you're going to have the installation of the king. I think it's going to be transformational on that part of the park. There's a desire to do some more investment in the visitor center. And there's a couple that I just met that purchased a building across from the Park Street T-Stop, and they are building a Holocaust museum. So I'm feeling really, really excited about what's going to happen over there, and I think it's all going to be very good. They will be breaking ground with the King Memorial on Friday, January 13th. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Is with the drought this year, is the parks trying to figure out how to use less water and make it?
So one of the great things about the work of the Friends, and it's so much, we spend so much time trying to get people to understand what we do, right? Because everyone's like, oh yeah, the city does that. It's like, oh they don't. So after Winthrop Square, one of the first things that I had to tackle was going back to the board. The city was giving up on the irrigation system because it was causing such problems. And the Friends was investing, as I said, almost $2 million in the trees and the turf and the sculpture and all those other things, but the trees and the turf. And you can't really have healthy trees and turf without water. So I was incredibly fortunate in the commitment of the board, and the Friends 6 years ago took on the irrigation system and redid it. And we have a very, very sophisticated watering system that saves, it doesn't overwater. The old system used to just turn on at a certain period of time and would throw the water out. It's a much, much more sophisticated system now, and it does take into consideration about temperature, dryness, moisture, all that. It's really amazing how much we've done there. I have a challenge for, sorry, go ahead.
I just have one more. You had some experience with parks around Boston, parks around London. Was there of course, beautiful, and I was wondering if you had a dream idea to incorporate in any of our parks with an unlimited budget, what would you want to incorporate?
A cafe and beer garden, maybe? I joke around that one of the things that I love so much about London is really the quality of those parks. If you've ever been to Europe, right? I drool, I get aspirational, I take pictures, I send them to the Parks Department, I drive everyone in my office crazy. I think that level, like, you know, our former Mayor Walsh used to talk about world-class parks, and I used to think, oh, God, you know, I don't think he's really looked around. I would love to see, you know, the Boston Common is the nation's first public park. It's the first park. And the Boston Public Garden is one of the first botanical gardens in our country. And so I think the public garden's really looking pretty good. There's a couple things that I go crazy on, but we really need to transform the Boston Common. It's a shame, it's a shambles. When my husband's European family comes to visit, they're all like, oh, Leslie, it's so sad, that poor park. They're like, oh no. I would love to see the pathways. I would love to see the lighting. I would love to see the edging. The frog pond is long overdue for a renovation. But I do joke that it's time for me to retire when the one thing I love in London parks is these beautiful little tiny cafes, and I can have a beautiful meal, and I have a glass of wine. And I'm not looking to be at a rave. Like, I'm just having a lovely moment in a green space, safely. So, you know, I don't know, I think that, you know, that's what I'd like to see. So, one of the things we struggle with, and I'll challenge you all, is that, you know, our name is the Friends of the Public Garden. And it doesn't really reflect what we do, right? It's like, oh yeah, and the Common, we used to say this all the time to the mayor, and the Common and the Comac Mall. So we're currently having conversations with brand people, you know, about how do we make our name reflective of who we are, but make sure that we're a welcoming and inclusive place for all. So stay tuned, we're trying to figure out what is that name. I don't know. So thank you all.